Don't do that. Hello. How you doing? I'm Don Rosen. I am a diagnostic radiologist, and I am the CEO of the American College of Radiology Image Metrix, which is a imaging CRO, but as part of the ACR is dedicated to working with imaging scientists, radiologists, medical physicists, and imaging sites within the United States to help facilitate their success working in industry-sponsored clinical research. The areas where we can help imaging sites and imaging scientists is helping them with the processes involved in working in industry-sponsored research, systems, validated systems, investigative systems, data systems, providing GCP training for investigators, providing people who have the knowledge of working within the regulatory systems, working with sites in their qualification, working in the different areas of quantitative analysis and quantitative interpretation, and frankly supplementing their internal processes and their services. We can work with sites and investigators to help create opportunities for them by providing the marketing and the business development that's necessary to bring industry-sponsored research to their sites. And the most important thing in clinical trials and clinical trials research, whether it's imaging or other areas, is providing accuracy, providing quality, and especially providing timeliness of data. The regulatory processes and as well as industry demands these from their sites. Molecular imaging and drug development is a long process. It begins with the identification of targets, identification of compounds, preclinical development, all the way through the phases of development to phase 3. But the pathway to knowledge as it works in imaging is biomarkers and molecular imaging. We can now target populations. We can look at the assessment, pre-treatment of our subjects. We can monitor disease, and we can look at response assessment. Drug development, and borrowed this slide, and you've seen it many times in many presentations, it's like a big funnel. Many millions of compounds are screened, and at the end of the day, it's perfectly acceptable if one or two of these products come out the other end of the funnel. It sometimes takes between 15 to 20 years to get a compound out of development, and it can cost, I've seen anywhere from, in this slide, $800 million to $1.4 billion to get a drug from a compound through the funnel and out the other end. Worldwide clinical trials in 2010 were reported over 25,000 individual trials. The growth in the United States alone is close to 6% a year. In oncology is the largest area of growth, but year to year they're predicting for the next at least 5 to 6 years a 20% growth in the number of clinical trials. We've recognized at Image Metrix that a lot of this growth is taking place within areas where, frankly, the utilization of these compounds is growing as well. China, India, Brazil, Russia. So a lot of the trials that are currently being done in the US are also being done all over the world, and it's important to have an international representation when you're doing these trials. The spending for 2010 is estimated at $25 billion worldwide for the performance of industry-sponsored trials. In 2014, that's expected to increase by another $3.5 billion to $28 billion. The imaging component is a little harder to get your hands around, but having spoken to people involved in clinical trials and clinical research, we estimate this to be about $700 million a year is currently being spent by industry in order to work on clinical trials. The growth for this area is estimated to be between 25 to 30% a year and shows no evidence of decreasing. This is because of what I showed earlier, using biomarkers, molecular imaging, quantitative imaging. There's a necessity to use imaging techniques now in clinical trials to expedite the trials, limit the number of patients, and get their drugs to market sooner. The rationale for using the image component is if you have fewer study subjects, then you're going to have a higher, and you can get a higher statistical significance, and you can decrease the number of patients necessary and get that. It's all about getting a compound, whether it's a medical device or a drug or a biomedical product, to market sooner. And what can we do as imagers to get it there sooner? The things that the biopharma and medical device industries are looking for most are quality, accuracy, consistency in data, and timeliness. And how can we as imagers provide that for them? This year, 10 of the largest pharmaceutical companies around the world put together a new organization funded with just a large amount of money, which they call Transcelerate Biopharma. And what the purpose of this is, what can pharmaceutical and biotech companies do to in the pre-competitive space to decrease the time necessary to do clinical trials and also standardize what goes through the clinical trial process. And they set out 100 goals, and they evaluated all of them and came up with 5. And it all involves standardization. They want to create clinical data standards. They want to standardize the risk to patients and how we measure it. They want to build a common website for all doctors all over the world who are going to participate in clinical trials, where they can go and sign up for clinical trials. But they also want to standardize the process of how do we train doctors to participate in clinical trials, and how do we qualify these doctors. They also want to standardize the process by which companies strike their deals or do their finances with clinical trial sites, because it's all over the place. There are academic sites, there are commercial sites, and you have to standardize the process that they financially deal with these sites. Now, this is for the industry as a whole. Nowhere in here does it talk about imaging, but we know that if imaging is utilized either by clinical investigators for primary or secondary endpoints, or if imaging is being used early on in the cutting edge and bleeding edge, or phase 1 looking at the process with sites, that standardization needs to be done there too. So what can we do as the American College of Radiology, and what can we do as Image Metrix to work with our sites to make sure that they will meet the standards that are being set forth for every investigator around the world? Well, we believe that the ACR has a very important place in industry-sponsored research. The ACR 40 years ago established a clinical research center. It's located in Philadelphia in downtown. It takes up about 50,000 square feet of a building in downtown Philadelphia, and has worked on over 400 different clinical trials and registries, most notably through ACRIM and RTOG, which are located in this site. On site are about 210 researchers, and we have the facilities, if necessary, to accommodate up to 50 readers in the site. Well, ACR Image Metrix was founded in 2007 to provide the same rigor for industry-sponsored research that was already being provided for grant-funded research. And as a secondary benefit is to facilitate our members, which are the imaging scientists and the imaging sites, their success in participation in clinical trials. The expertise at Image Metrix and in the ACR Clinical Research Center is in biopharmaceutical development, medical device development, and developing the basis for quantitative imaging. Any of you who have been attending sessions here at the RSNA know that quantitative imaging, computational imaging, quantitative imaging, these are the buzzwords. In other words, how can we as a profession come up with ways of analyzing images that are repetitive, they're standardized, and can lead to results across the board? There's a big effort for reporting, structured reporting, so that all the information that's disseminated to our doctors and to patients is standardized across the board. And we, by participating in the research end of it, can provide this information as well. The American College of Radiology has 36,000 radiologists and imaging scientists as members. They can be used as consultants, they can be used as PIs, independent readers, and they have a knowledge both in generalized and specialized areas that they can fit the protocol needs of sponsors. We also have 35,000 accredited sites. The American College of Radiology has independently accredited these sites. They're community sites or academic sites. And this research infrastructure can use these personnel that are at these sites to perform trials. And the one area where there's a great lack of cohesiveness is in multi-center trials. In other words, there's a lot of single-center trials that are being done in research, and there's different issues with that. But when you look at multi-center trials, you have to have a standardization across the trials in terms of the imaging, in terms of the physics, and in terms of the people who are doing whether they've been trained properly. So ACR Image Metrix has worked in the last 6 years in global trials, mostly in oncology, CNS, cardiovascular, and musculoskeletal. We've worked in over 30 countries. We've worked on over 100 trials with 30 different sponsors. So we want to take this knowledge that we've gained working with industry and try to diffuse it to our members for their use. I borrowed this slide. This is a slide that's often showed in the Clinical Research Center. I think Mitch Snall is actually the person who first put this out, but it's a very, very complicated process. It's a jigsaw puzzle. And all the things you see on the left and all the things you see in the puzzle, you have to make all the pieces of the process fit together in order to do it properly. And this is an expectation of industry, that all these pieces are put together and done properly. There's also an issue that comes to systems. So you not only have to have systems to handle your data, you have to have systems that are validated according to the Federal Register, CFR 21 Part 11, in addition to being validated to do the data correctly. We put together a group of systems at ACR Image Metrix. It starts with Triad, which is an ACR. It's the ACR, I call it the pipe. It's the pipe that moves images from one place to the other and can move metadata, can move patient data, can exist in the cloud, and it's a way of getting images from, frankly, sites all around the world. In addition, we're putting in place a CTMS system that works in clinical trials management. You have to have a way of tracking your patients. You have to have then a way of getting all this information into workstations that can analyze the data. And finally, you have to be able to create ECRFs, electronic case report forms, from your workstations that can then be translated easily into data capture systems and put all your data together. At Image Metrix, we spend a lot of time putting these systems together. Certainly, if you want to take some time afterwards to talk to me about our different systems that we're using, I'd be glad to discuss them with you. So you have to optimize the power now of these studies for your clinical trials. We talked about quality, accuracy, consistency, and timeliness. Now, what can we do to help individual researchers and sites get to where they want to get to? We can provide organization and management. We can help you with the standardization of the processes across the trials. We can work on qualification of scanners, qualification of your systems, and if necessary, certification of folks. Specifically, when I say certification, readers, analysis tools, and things like that. And one of the reasons that we have to do this is, and this is a slide that Eric Perlman prepared for me, and I said to him, if you really wanted to, you could take arrows and connect every single box. It's a complicated process. You have, on one hand, biopharma medical device companies. On the other hand, you have your subjects. And there's a lot of crosstalk of information, imaging data, primary investigators, CROs, an imaging lab, imaging facilities, and many other people. And it's very complex, so someone has to be able to handle this process and make sure that the data is getting where it needs to get to, where it needs to go. Imaging facilities, where we feel we can help is we can go to the imaging facilities, we can go to the sites and help them evaluate their processes, their staff, their hardware, and come up with them with what their capabilities are. We can then work on training these imaging facilities in acceptable protocols. There are efforts going on here at this meeting with the RSNA called KIBA. It's an effort to start to standardize imaging biomarkers across sites. They're working on the uniform protocols of clinical trials, the UPICT initiatives, and we can help work with sites to help train them in these areas, and we can then help them apply for any qualifications or certifications that they feel are necessary. We can also work with sites to train them in GCP, good clinical practices, and ICH, all regulated, all regulatory research. Researchers have to be trained in these processes. These are the necessary rules and regulations of all clinical trials, and they've been harmonized internationally. That's what ICH is across the world, and we all need to participate and understand those processes. We can also work on their own internal standard operating procedures, or SOPs. In order to adequately perform clinical research, you have to have SOPs that define the rules and regulations of how your own group, your own systems are going to participate in this clinical trial. Qualification we talked about. Now we're all familiar with ACR accreditation. You know, that's accrediting sites for the participation in clinical work. There's a second layer to it, which is what is required in clinical research and clinical trials, which is the qualification of that. So there's a standardization of training and education and, frankly, physics support that's necessary to qualify instrumentation and scanners. In terms of business support, we also understand that there's a business here. There's a business of sites wanting to do clinical trials. There's a business of the ACR participating in those clinical trials, and we can help with sites to understand how the dollars flow between industry and how it flows down to the sites and to our members and our researchers, and to help them make plans in order to deal with that effectively. It also was interesting that of the 5 points that the biopharma industry identified was this financial model. They also have to work. They don't want to, every time they deal with researchers, reinvent the wheel and keep on reinventing the financial wheel. And we can also hopefully work with our own sites and our own members to help them not to have to reinvent that financial wheel every time. There's also the issue of readers. You know, sponsors, which is what we call, by the way, industry. They sponsor clinical trials, whether they're sponsors in pharmaceuticals, sponsors in biotech, or sponsors in medical device, need people to analyze and read images. We can help them with sourcing those reads from sponsors, from CROs, from industry, to the membership and to the people that we work with. There's one area that's overlooked often in clinical research, and that's the CRO industry. I don't know how many people here have ever heard of a CRO, know what a CRO is. Well, I can tell you, I've seen 4 people in this audience raise their hands. It's a $10 billion industry that nobody knows about, and they're all over this exhibit hall. They're all over everywhere in clinical research. They're contract research organizations, and 60% of what they do, 50, 70% of what they do is something called monitoring. And what monitoring means is they go into organizations and they check the work that researchers have done. And it's not because researchers don't do a good job, it's just that everything has to be right. Everything has to be with a black pencil, or everything has to be circled, and everything has to be crossed out and dated. And monitors go to facilities all around the world to check to see what is going on. In imaging, there's not a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of knowledge in monitoring in other areas, but this is an area where really we've gotten the short shaft in that there aren't a lot of experienced people out there monitoring and imaging, and there's a lack of consistent data that's being presented by these monitors. If you have data that isn't and good and doesn't work, then you end up with data that can't be used. So at the end of the trial, they've gone to all these sites and monitored them, but they have all this imaging data, and sometimes the imaging data doesn't match up. So, you know, we also believe that there's a place for us to educate, train, and monitors in the nuances of clinical imaging and of imaging and quantitative imaging, and dispatch them to the sites so that at the end of the day, not only is the data that's coming out from the whole study accurate, but is also accurate for imaging data. And I think most issues can be brought to a satisfactory conclusion if the monitoring is done. It's a lot easier to do something right the first time than to try to fix it the second time. And if you have monitors out in the field representing the needs of imaging scientists and imaging sites, I think that would be a great advantage. So where do we work with industry? We think we can provide the sponsors, industry, with readers for interpretation, sites for imaging studies, and work with those sites to get them standardized in the way we want to see the data. So we can advance the timeliness of clinical trials by decreasing the quality issues in imaging and clinical trials, and that's what this is all about. This is how do we go about doing it. You know, I'm going to finish where I started. You know, I know, you got to finish where you start. Where can the ACR work with clinical imagers? Where can they work with clinical imaging sites in the processes, the complex processes, complex systems, making sure we have validated systems, making sure that all people participating in clinical trials have GCP training, have SOPs that guide what they do, make sure that the right people are there to do the job. We can help with the qualification of sites if necessary. We can help with the interpretation and analysis, working in a consulting role to make sure that everyone understands what is the right endpoint of the trial and how do you do the interpretation and the analysis that's necessary. And frankly, just to supplement what's already out there, there's a great amount of brain power and scientific knowledge and technical knowledge in the imaging community. But how do you harness that and supplement it to make it work as well for clinical trials as it works for clinical medicine? You know, we can work on the marketing, but the bottom line is it's all about accuracy, it's all about quality, it's all about timeliness, and how can we, as the college and as Image Metrix, work with our members and with sites to make sure that they can deliver this. This is the expectation of industry, and if we can deliver that and deliver it on time, then we've accomplished what we need to do. And I'm going to stop and take questions if there are any. And I talk really quick. I'm from New York. I have to apologize ahead of time. Okay. No questions. Well, I recognize most of the audience here. You're all there. Okay.